In the vast silence between galaxies, there is a kind of patience that older species mistake for emptiness. They look upon the dark and see nothing. They measure the void in light years and declare it conquered. But the dark has never been empty. It has only ever been waiting. I am Velun Thros, third voice of the dominion of eternal stars, and I have lived long enough to understand that the universe does not reward arrogance. It punishes it, slowly, completely, with the same patience it uses to birth stars and collapse them into memory. For 11,000 years, my people believed ourselves the architects of order. We charted the spiral arms. We catalogued the primitive worlds. We decided which species would rise and which would remain in carefully managed darkness, never knowing the light they might have touched. We believed this was wisdom. Now, as I watch the last of our fleets burn in the coordinates where Thalon Prime once held 16 billion souls, I understand it was only fear. Fear of what we could not control. Fear of what we could not predict. Fear of a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, where a species too young to understand its own fragility looked up at the night sky and dreamed of conquest. We feared them so much that 800 years ago, the Dominion Council voted to end their future before it could begin. We did not destroy Earth. That would have been merciful. Instead, we built the Veil. The shuttle descended through layers of security that would have seemed excessive 3 months ago. Now, with the Hollow advancing through Dominion space at a rate our strategists could no longer model, every precaution felt insufficient. I had never visited Sol Station before. Few Dominion officials had. The humans kept to themselves, contained within the boundaries we had imposed upon them, and we had been content to forget they existed. The Veil had been our solution to the human problem, a network of gravitational projectors positioned at the edge of their system, bending space in ways that made faster-than-light travel impossible within their borders. For 8 centuries, humanity had remained trapped around their sun, watching our ships pass through their sky like distant gods who would never speak to them. We had taken their stars from them, and now I had come to ask for their help. The docking bay was smaller than I expected, functional, clean, but without ornamentation. Human engineering had a quality I found difficult to name. Every surface served a purpose, every angle calculated for efficiency rather than beauty. A woman was waiting for me when the airlock cycled open. She was shorter than I anticipated, with dark hair pulled back from a face that showed neither hostility nor warmth. Her uniform was simple, no medals, no insignia of rank that I could identify. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching me with eyes that seemed to be cataloging everything about me in a single glance. "Third voice, Velun Thros," she said. "I'm Commander Sarah Chen. Welcome to Sol Station." I inclined my head in the Dominion gesture of formal greeting. "Commander Chen, I bring the gratitude of the Eternal Council for your willingness to receive our delegation." Something flickered in her expression. Not quite amusement, not quite contempt. Something more complicated that I could not read. "Your delegation," she said. "You're alone, third voice." I felt the words catch in my throat. 3 months ago, a diplomatic mission to a contained species would have warranted a full ceremonial escort. Warships, honor guards, the pageantry of power. Now, there was only me. "I am sufficient. I managed," Commander Chen studied me for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she nodded once and gestured for me to follow. "This way, the Admiral is waking." We walked through corridors that hummed with activity I did not expect. Seoul Station had been built as a prison, a waypoint where human vessels could be monitored and contained. The Dominion had designed it. We had allowed the humans to maintain it, a gesture of condescension we had called diplomacy. But the humans had made it something else. The walls were covered with information displays, streams of data flowing in patterns I could not immediately parse. I saw star charts, not of their system, but of the galaxy beyond, detailed, current, far more accurate than they should have been. "You monitor our transmissions," I said. Commander Chen did not break stride. "We listen. There's a difference. The veil should prevent." "The veil prevents travel," third voice. "It doesn't prevent light. It doesn't prevent radio waves. It doesn't prevent us from seeing what's happening beyond our cage." She glanced back at me with those measuring eyes. "We've been watching for a very long time." I felt something cold settled in my chest. "Then you know why I'm here." "We know the Hollow reached your inner systems 4 weeks ago. We know you've lost contact with 17 colony worlds. We know your fleets at the Thyrian line held for 6 days before they were overwhelmed." She paused at a junction, waiting for a door to cycle open. "We know you're losing." The words struck me with more force than I expected. For 11,000 years, the Dominion had never lost. We had faced threats before: the Cascade Wars, the Silent Rebellion, the machine uprising of the Fourth Sector. We had always prevailed. But the Hollow was different. "We are experiencing setbacks," I said, the diplomatic phrasing automatic and hollow. Commander Chen said nothing. She led me into a lift that descended for longer than seemed possible, deep into the station's core. When the doors opened, I found myself in a chamber that took my breath away. It was a command center unlike anything I had seen in Dominion space. Massive display screens covered every surface, showing real-time feeds from across the galaxy. I saw Dominion space, or what was left of it. I saw the advance of the Hollow, the dark tide consuming system after system. I saw the desperate retreat of our remaining fleets, the frantic evacuation of worlds we could no longer defend. They had been watching everything. A man stood at the center of the room, his back to us as he studied a tactical display. He was older than Commander Chen, with gray at his temples and a stillness about him that reminded me of the ancient trees on the Dominion homeworld, organisms that had learned to measure time in centuries rather than moments. "Admiral Morrison," Commander Chen said. Third voice, "Valen Thross." The man turned. His eyes found mine, and I felt the weight of his attention like a physical pressure. There was no hatred in his gaze, no anger, nothing so simple as resentment for 8 centuries of imprisonment. There was only patience. "Third voice," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled. "Please, sit down. You look exhausted." I realized with sudden shame that I was trembling. When had I last slept? When had I last eaten? The journey to Saul had taken 3 days, 3 days watching the feeds as world after world went dark behind me. I sank into the offered chair without protest. Admiral Morrison remained standing. He clasped his hands behind his back and studied me with the same careful attention Commander Chen had shown. "You're here to ask us to fight," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "For the Dominion that imprisoned us." "Yes." For the civilization that decided 800 years ago that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed among the stars. I closed my eyes. Yes, the silence stretched between us. On the screens behind the Admiral, I watched another Dominion world disappear into the dark. "Why us?" Commander Chen asked. She had taken a position beside the Admiral, her arms crossed. "You have 1,000 vassal species, 1,000,000 worlds, fleets that were supposed to be unstoppable. Why come here?" "Because we have nowhere else to go," I wanted to say. "Because we are desperate. Because we have tried everything and nothing has worked." But that was not the whole truth. "Because of the silence of Vareth," I said. Something shifted in the room. Admiral Morrison's expression did not change, but I saw his fingers tighten behind his back. "You know about Varath," he said. "Every species in the Dominion knows about Varath." I met his eyes, forcing myself to speak the words that our histories had tried so hard to bury. 17 years after the Veil was completed, a hollow incursion struck the Varath system. 8 billion lives. One of our greatest fleet bases. And you. I trailed off. The official records called it an anomaly, a malfunction in the Hollow's advance that had somehow been repelled. But the unofficial records told a different story. "We had one ship," Admiral Morrison said quietly. "A prototype. We called it the Prometheus. It was designed to test the limits of the Veil, to find a way through. Instead, it found your fleet dying at Vareth, and its captain made a choice." "He saved them," I said. 8 billion lives. A single human ship against an enemy that had destroyed everything we sent against it. And he saved them. The silence returned. On the screens, another star winked out. "We buried the reports," I continued. "The Council decided that no one could know. If word spread that a single contained human vessel had accomplished what our greatest fleets could not, it would have raised questions we were not prepared to answer." "Questions about why we were contained in the first place," Commander Chen said. I could not meet her eyes. "Yes." Admiral Morrison walked slowly to one of the screens, watching the tactical display as the Hollow's advance continued its inexorable march. "The Dominion has always underestimated us," he said. "You saw our world and counted our years. You measured our technology and found it primitive. You looked at our history, our wars, our divisions, our capacity for self-destruction, and you decided we were too dangerous to be trusted." "We were trying to protect the galaxy," I said. The words sounded weak even to my own ears. "You were trying to protect yourselves," the Admiral turned to face me. "From us, from what we might become, from what we represented." "And what is that?" He smiled. It was not a warm expression. "Potential," third voice. "Uncontrolled, unpredictable potential. Every other species you encountered could be modeled, predicted, contained within the boundaries of their own psychology. But humans," he shook his head, "humans adapt. We change. We refuse to be what we were yesterday if tomorrow demands something new." "That's what frightened you," Commander Chen added. "Not our weapons, not our aggression. Our capacity to become something you couldn't anticipate." I thought of the council debates I had studied, the ancient arguments over what to do with the species on the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. Some had advocated destruction, others had suggested genetic modification, rewriting the human mind to be more predictable, more manageable. In the end, the Veil had seemed like a compromise. "We were wrong," I said. The admission felt like a wound opening.
We were arrogant and afraid, and we made a terrible mistake.
Admiral Morrison nodded slowly. Yes, you did.
And now we need you. The Hollow cannot be stopped by anything we have. Nothing we've tried has worked. Our weapons, our tactics, our technology, none of it matters. They consume everything. They adapt to everything. And they're coming for all of us. Every world, every species, every star.
I leaned forward, every fiber of my being focused on this one moment.
I am not asking you to forgive us. I am not asking you to forget what we did. I am asking you to help us survive. Not for our sake, for the sake of the children who will never know why their world went dark. For the sake of the species who never voted for the veil, who never knew you existed until the day their sun disappeared into the void.
The silence that followed was the longest of my life.
Finally, Admiral Morrison spoke. Show me the Hollow.
For the next 3 hours, I shared everything.
The intelligence reports, the fleet dispositions, the failed strategies and the worlds we had lost. I held nothing back, stripping away centuries of secrecy and diplomatic maneuvering until the humans had access to more information about Dominion military operations than most of our own generals.
Admiral Morrison listened without interruption. Commander Chen took notes on a device I did not recognize, her expression betraying nothing.
When I finished, my throat raw and my hands shaking, the Admiral stood motionless before the central display. The Hollow's advance was mapped in crimson, a cancer spreading through the heart of Dominion space.
How long? He asked.
At their current rate of advance, 8 months until they reach the core worlds, 12 until they find Sol.
And your remaining military assets?
I pulled up the numbers, watching his face as he processed them.
37% of pre-war strength, scattered, demoralized, fighting retreat actions that only delay the inevitable.
Admiral Morrison nodded slowly, as if I had confirmed something he already suspected.
Commander Chen, please escort the third voice to his quarters. See that he gets something to eat and some rest.
I stood, my legs unsteady. Admiral, I need an answer. My government needs to know if humanity will...
You'll have your answer in the morning, third voice. His voice was gentle but firm. For now, rest. You look like you haven't slept in days.
I wanted to argue. I wanted to demand an immediate response, to remind him that every hour wasted was another world consumed. But the exhaustion that had been building for weeks finally crashed over me, and I found myself following Commander Chen out of the command center without protest. She led me to a small but comfortable room with a bed that looked more inviting than anything I had seen in months.
The Admiral isn't avoiding your question, she said as I sank onto the mattress. He just needs time to think.
Time is the one thing we don't have.
She smiled, a real smile, the first I had seen from her.
Third voice, with respect, you don't know what we have. The door closed behind her, and I fell into the deepest sleep I had experienced in years. I dreamed of fire. Not the destructive fire of the Hollow, but something older, something primal. I stood on a world I did not recognize, watching as primitive humans huddled around flames that pushed back the darkness of a hostile night. Predators circled beyond the light, patient and hungry. But the humans did not flee. They sat together around their fragile fire, and they told stories. They planned. They waited for dawn, knowing that the light would return. I woke to a gentle chime and a message on the room's display.
The Admiral will see you now. The command center had transformed.
Where before it had been a monitoring station, now it hummed with activity that bordered on controlled chaos. Officers moved between stations with purpose, speaking in clipped phrases I could not follow. The displays had changed, no longer simply showing the Hollow's advance, but overlaying it with tactical projections and resource allocations.
Admiral Morrison stood at the center of it all, speaking quietly with Commander Chen and a dozen other officers I did not recognize. When he saw me, he broke away from the group and approached.
Third voice. I hope you slept well.
I did. I looked around at the activity, feeling something unfamiliar stir in my chest. What is happening? Not the crude vessels I had expected from a contained species, not the fragile prototypes of a civilization denied the stars. These were warships, angular, efficient, bristling with weapon systems I did not recognize.
That's impossible, I whispered. The veil should have prevented. The veil prevented us from leaving, Commander Chen said, joining us. It didn't prevent us from building.
I stared at the display, watching as more vessels appeared. Carriers, dreadnoughts, hundreds of smaller craft that moved with a coordination that suggested decades of training.
For 800 years, Admiral Morrison said quietly, we knew this day would come. Maybe not the Hollow specifically, but something. The Dominion thought they were containing a threat. What they were really doing was giving us time to prepare. Prepare for what? For the day when the cage would open. He met my eyes. For the day when we would finally be allowed to fight.
I felt the floor shift beneath me. Everything I had believed about humanity, their weakness, their containment, their irrelevance, collapsed in an instant.
How many ships? I heard myself ask.
12,000 in Sol System, another 8,000 distributed across hidden construction facilities in the asteroid belt and the outer planets. 20,000 ships, a force larger than what remained of the Dominion's entire fleet. That's not possible. The resources alone would require...
We're very patient, third voice. Admiral Morrison's voice carried a weight that silenced me. And very, very angry. Commander Chen activated another display. This one showed personnel numbers, training statistics, logistics projections. I saw 18 billion human souls spread across their system. 18 billion, up from 3 billion when the veil had first been activated.
They had not merely survived their imprisonment.
They had thrived.
When the veil went up, the Admiral continued, our ancestors faced a choice. They could accept their cage and fade into irrelevance, or they could use every moment of their captivity to prepare for the day when the walls would fall. He paused. They chose to prepare. Every generation since has done the same.
But why? I could not comprehend it. 8 centuries of relentless effort for a war that might never come? How could you maintain that focus for so long? How could you pass that determination from parent to child across 800 years?
Admiral Morrison was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft.
Because you took away our stars, third voice. You looked at a species that had dreamed of touching the cosmos since they first looked up at the night sky, and you told them they would never leave their cradle. He smiled, and there was something terrible in that expression. Humans do not forgive easily, and we never forget. I sank into a nearby chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me.
You've been waiting for this moment. All this time, you've been waiting for us to need you.
No, Commander Chen shook her head. We've been waiting for the day when we could prove you wrong.
when we could show the galaxy that the species you dismissed as primitive, as dangerous, as unworthy of the stars, that species was exactly what you needed all along.
I thought of the council debates, the fear that had driven the decision to create the veil, the arrogance of ancient species who believed they understood the nature of threats.
We had been so afraid of what humanity might become.
We had never considered what they might choose to become.
"Admiral," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "will you help us?"
Morrison studied me for a long moment. I saw the weight of 8 centuries in his eyes, the accumulated anger and determination of a species denied their birthright.
Then he nodded. The negotiations took 3 days. Not because the humans demanded unreasonable terms. If anything, their requests were startlingly modest. They wanted the veil dismantled, of course. They wanted full recognition as equals within whatever governance structure emerged after the war. They wanted the historical records corrected, the truth about their containment made public. But the main reason for the delay was that I had to convince the Dominion Council that accepting human help would not be worse than extinction.
The debates were vicious. Elder voices who had been alive when the veil was first activated spoke of the danger humanity represented. They cited our own ancient prophecies, the warnings that had first prompted the containment decision. They demanded to know how we could trust a species we had wronged so grievously.
"They have every reason to let us burn," Voice Kethril thundered in one session. "They have been waiting for this moment for 8 centuries. How do we know they won't simply watch us die and then claim what remains?"
I stood before the council, exhausted beyond words, and spoke the only truth I had left. Because they could have done that already. They have 20,000 ships. They have the technology and the numbers to contest any force we might muster. If they wanted revenge, they could have taken it the moment I arrived at Sol Station.
Then why haven't they? Another voice demanded.
Because they're not us. The chamber fell silent. We contained them out of fear, I continued. We looked at their capacity for violence and their unpredictable nature, and we assumed they would use that capacity for destruction. But we were wrong. They used it for preparation, for discipline, for the patience to wait 800 years for a chance to prove themselves. I turned to address the full council. Admiral Morrison told me something before I left Sol Station. He said that humanity had learned over the centuries that the measure of a species is not how it treats its friends. It is how it treats those who have wronged it. We wronged them terribly, and their response was not to plan revenge. It was to become something greater than we believed possible. The council debated for another 12 hours. In the end, the vote was closer than I would have liked. But it passed. Dismantling the veil took 11 days. Human engineers worked alongside Dominion specialists, taking apart a network of gravitational projectors that had operated without interruption for 8 centuries. I watched from the observation deck of Sol Station as the last projector went dark. For a moment, nothing seemed to change. Then, Admiral Morrison's voice came over the station's communications system. "Attention, all vessels. The veil is down. Repeat, the veil is down. Initiate Operation Prometheus." Space around Sol Station exploded with light. One by one, the human fleet emerged from the shadows where they had waited. Dreadnoughts longer than Dominion carriers, cruiser squadrons moving in perfect formation, destroyer wings that swept through the system like schools of predatory fish. And at their center, something I had not expected.
Ships that burned with contained fire.
Not metaphorical fire, actual visible flames trailing from their engines, defying the vacuum of space itself. The ships seemed to dance in the darkness, leaving trails of light that painted impossible patterns against the stars. "What are those?" I asked Commander Chen, who had remained at my side throughout the negotiations. "The Phoenix Corps," she said. "Our answer to the Hollow." "But those flames—" "Plasma containment fields layered around our most advanced weapon systems." She smiled at my expression. "The Hollow consumes matter and energy. It adapts to any weapon it encounters. But there's one thing it can't adapt to." "What?" "Fire that burns hotter than suns. Fire that doesn't just destroy, it purifies." She gestured at the burning ships. "For 800 years we've been perfecting solar weapons, technology that harnesses the power of stars themselves and focuses it into directed energy systems." I thought of the Veil, the technology that had been designed to block humanity from the stars. They had taken that enforced proximity to their sun and turned it into a weapon.
"You used your prison as a laboratory," I whispered.
"We used every moment we were given," Commander Chen replied. "That's what humans do, Third Voice. We adapt, we endure, and when the darkness comes, we bring our own light." The journey to the front lines took 3 weeks. I traveled aboard the flagship of the human fleet, a massive vessel called the Sun Spear. Admiral Morrison commanded from its bridge, orchestrating the movement of 20,000 ships through space that had become a graveyard. We passed world after world that the Hollow had consumed. I saw the remains of civilizations I had known, the crystalline towers of Verith Prime, now dark and silent, the orbital habitats of the Clenthi Confederation, floating empty among debris fields that had once been their fleet. 18 billion lives lost on those habitats alone. Children who had never seen the Hollow coming. Elders who remembered when the Dominion had seemed eternal. Gone. All of them gone. "It gets easier," Admiral Morrison said quietly, standing beside me as I watched another dead world drift past.
"What does?"
"Watching them die." He was not looking at the planet below. He was looking at something far more distant. At first, you feel every loss like a wound. You remember names, faces, the way someone laughed. Then you learn to put those feelings somewhere else, somewhere deep where they can fuel you without destroying you. Is that what humanity did during your centuries of imprisonment? We did it long before that, Third Voice. He turned to face me. Humans have been learning to live with loss since before we had words for it. We've survived ice ages and plagues, wars that killed millions, disasters that should have ended us a dozen times over. He paused. Every time we got back up. Every time we found a reason to keep going.
What reason? Spite, mostly.
He smiled at my confusion. When the universe tells a human they can't do something, their first instinct is to prove it wrong. It's not rational, it's not strategic, but it's kept us alive when logic said we should have died.
I thought about that as the fleet continued its advance. We encountered our first Hollow Scout 3 days later. The creatures of the Hollow were not alive in any sense I understood. They were more like voids, absences in the fabric of reality that consumed whatever they touched. Their ships, if they could be called ships, were constructs of compressed darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Scout appeared without warning, dropping out of twisted space directly in front of the fleet's vanguard.
I expected chaos. I expected alarm klaxons and frantic maneuvering, the kind of desperate response I had seen from Dominion fleets in the weeks before the fall.
Instead, the humans did nothing. For 3 long seconds, the scout hung in space, its sensors sweeping the fleet. I watched it extend sensor tendrils, dark wisps of non-matter that reached toward the nearest human vessels. Then Admiral Morrison spoke a single word. Phoenix. The burning ships moved.
They swept forward in formation, their plasma fields trailing fire through the void. The scout shifted to meet them, its dark tendrils reaching out to consume these new threats, just as it had consumed countless Dominion vessels.
The flames touched the darkness, and the darkness screamed. I had never heard a hollow vessel make a sound before. They consumed in silence, their victims dying without a whisper. But the human weapons, the fire that burned hotter than suns, caused something I had thought impossible. The scout was burning. Its dark matter hull rippled and tore as the plasma containment fields washed over it. The fire did not merely damage the vessel, it unraveled it, stripping away the void stuff layer by layer until there was nothing left but rapidly dispersing energy. The engagement lasted 14 seconds. When it was over, the Phoenix Corps vessels returned to formation. Their flames still burned, steady and patient, waiting for the next enemy to challenge them. "That's impossible," I said. "The hollow adapts. It consumes any weapon." "It consumes matter and conventional energy," Commander Chen corrected. She had observed the engagement from the Sun Spear's auxiliary command center. "Our weapons don't just attack matter, they attack the fundamental forces that hold it together. The hollow can't adapt to that any more than you could adapt to having your atoms rearranged." "How did you develop such technology? The veil should have limited your access to the materials." "We had a son." Third voice. Her voice carried something I had not heard from her before. Satisfaction. For 800 years, we had nothing but our sun and our determination. We studied it, we experimented with it, we learned to harness every aspect of stellar physics. She paused. "You tried to cut us off from the stars. Instead, you gave us the most powerful laboratory in existence." I stared at the space where the Holo Scout had been, now marked only by expanding clouds of residual energy. In that moment, I began to understand why my ancestors had been so afraid. The Battle of Thyrus Prime was supposed to be a defensive action. The system was one of the last major Dominion strongholds before the Core Worlds, home to 3 billion civilians and the remnants of our 7th Fleet. If it fell, the path to the heart of our civilization would lie open. We expected to hold for days, perhaps weeks if we were lucky. We did not expect to win. The Hollow arrived in force, 600 vessels, more than we had ever seen in a single engagement. Their dark hulls blotted out the stars as they descended on Thyrus Prime like a tide of night. The Dominion fleet moved to intercept, but we all knew it was futile. We had faced smaller forces with larger fleets and been overwhelmed. Then the humans attacked. Not from the front, where we expected them, not from the flanks, where military doctrine suggested. From everywhere at once. The human fleet had split during our approach to Thyrus, dividing into hundreds of smaller strike groups that had been concealing themselves in the system's debris fields and asteroid belts. Now they emerged from every direction, their burning ships creating a net of fire that surrounded the Hollow forces.
I watched from the Sunspear's bridge as Admiral Morrison conducted the battle like a musician directing an orchestra. His orders were calm, precise, almost conversational. Ships moved in response to the slightest gesture, their captains anticipating his commands before he gave them.
The Hollow tried to adapt. I saw them shift their tactics, attempting to concentrate force against individual human vessels. But each time they gathered, another strike group would appear from an unexpected angle, their plasma weapons tearing into the Dark Fleet before it could respond.
"They're not fighting like a military," I said to Commander Chen. "They're fighting like predators," she finished. "Pack hunters. It's in our blood, Third Voice. Before we built cities, before we developed agriculture, humans were pursuit predators. We didn't outrun our prey, we outlasted them. We surrounded them. We wore them down until they couldn't fight anymore."
The Hollow vessels began to retreat.
I had never seen the Hollow retreat.
But the human fleet did not let them go. The strike groups regrouped, cutting off escape routes, herding the dark vessels toward the burning wall of the Phoenix Core. One by one, the Hollow ships were consumed by the very fire they had thought to extinguish.
The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, not a single Hollow vessel remained in Thyrus space. Human casualties: 11 ships damaged, 2 destroyed.
That night, the crew of the Sunspear held what they called a wake. They gathered in the ship's common areas and spoke of the 2 lost vessels, sharing stories about crews they had known and missions they had survived together. There was laughter mixed with tears, celebration tangled with grief.
I stood at the edge of one such gathering, uncertain whether I was welcome, when a young officer approached me. "Third Voice," she said. "Would you like to join us?"
I would not wish to intrude.
She smiled, a genuine expression, warm despite the sorrow in her eyes. "You're part of this now. Whether you wanted to be or not, you're one of us." I spent the rest of the night listening to stories about human lives I would never have known existed. Small stories, ordinary stories, tales of families and friendships, of silly mistakes and unexpected kindnesses. They were not the stories of conquerors or monsters. They were the stories of people. The war continued for 3 more months. The humans did not simply push back the Hollow, they dismantled it. Every engagement followed the same pattern: careful preparation, overwhelming coordination, and the merciless application of fire. I traveled with Admiral Morrison's fleet as we liberated world after world. I watched Dominion civilians emerge from shelters they had never expected to leave, blinking in the light of suns they had thought would never shine again. On Verith, the world that single human ship had saved 17 years before the veil fell, I witnessed something I will never forget. The human fleet arrived to find the system under siege, 3 Hollow vessels consuming the orbital platforms that protected the planet below. The Phoenix Core engaged immediately, their flames cutting through the darkness. When the battle was over, a shuttle descended to the planet's surface. Admiral Morrison was aboard, along with Commander Chen and myself. We landed in the central plaza of Verith's capital city, where a crowd had gathered to greet their liberators. I expected fear, perhaps resentment. These were people whose ancestors had voted for the Veil, who had believed humanity too dangerous to walk among the stars. Instead, there was silence. Then an old Dominion female stepped forward from the crowd. She was ancient, her scales dulled by age and her movements slowed by time. "Admiral Morrison," she said,
her voice carrying across the plaza. "I was 17 years old when your ship saved this world. My entire family would have died. My children would never have been born. My grandchildren." Her voice broke. "I have waited my whole life to thank you." Morrison stood motionless for a moment. Then, slowly, he crossed the distance between them and took her trembling hands in his.
"Ma'am," he said quietly, "we're not looking for thanks. We're just trying to do what's right."
The old female wept, and one by one the crowd around her did the same.
The final battle took place at the edge of the Hollow's origin point, a region of twisted space where reality itself had been torn open to admit them into our galaxy.
Intelligence suggested this was more than just an entry point. It was a gateway maintained by a structure of impossible complexity on the other side. Destroy the structure, close the gateway, and the Hollow's reinforcements would be cut off.
The human fleet gathered for the assault. 22,000 ships now, bolstered by Dominion vessels that had survived the early massacres and been refitted with human weapons. I stood on the bridge of the Sunspear as we approached the tear in space, watching as reality dissolved into chaos ahead of us.
"This is it," Admiral Morrison said. "Once we go through, there's no guarantee we come back."
Around me, I saw human faces, young and old, men and women, all of them calm, all of them ready.
"Admiral," I said, "may I ask you something?"
Of course. Why are you doing this? Truly. Not for diplomacy or alliance. Why would you risk everything, your fleet, your people, your future, for a galaxy that treated you so poorly? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "There's an old human story," third voice, "about a man who was robbed and beaten and left to die on the side of the road. People passed him by, important people, respected people. They saw his suffering and did nothing." He paused, his eyes fixed on the chaotic space ahead. Then came a stranger. Someone from a nation the wounded man's people despised. Someone with every reason to walk past and let an enemy die. But he didn't. He stopped. He helped. He saved the wounded man's life, not because of who he was, but because of who he chose to be. I thought of the veil, of 8 centuries of imprisonment, of the vote that had condemned humanity to darkness. "We were the people who left you on the side of the road," I said. "Yes." Morrison nodded slowly. "And now we have a choice. We can be like you were, afraid, vindictive, willing to let others suffer for our own safety. Or we can be something better." He turned to face me fully. "Humanity has done terrible things, third voice. We've made mistakes that cost millions of lives. We've been cruel and petty and selfish. But we've also learned. Every generation we try to be better than the one before. Not because we're good, but because we've seen what happens when we're not." The gateway loomed before us, a wound in the stars themselves. "Today," Morrison said, "we choose to be the stranger who stopped." The battle beyond the gateway lasted for 7 hours. I cannot describe what we found on the other side. There are no words in any language I know for the things that existed in that space. The structure maintaining the gateway was vast beyond comprehension, a construction of matter that should not have been possible. The Hollow defended it with everything they had. But the humans did not stop. Wave after wave, the burning ships pressed forward.
When one fell, another took its place. When formations broke, they reformed in heartbeats. The fire that had consumed countless hollow vessels now blazed against the impossible structure itself. I watched Admiral Morrison command the battle with the same calm precision he had shown at Thyrus Prime. But beneath that control, I saw something else now, a fierce, terrible joy. The joy of a species finally freed from its cage, finally allowed to show the galaxy what it was capable of. The structure began to collapse.
All ships, prepare for extraction, Morrison ordered. We have 90 seconds before this thing comes apart.
The fleet turned, racing back toward the gateway. Ships that had sustained damage limped toward safety, supported by vessels that refused to leave them behind.
We made it through with seconds to spare.
Behind us, the gateway collapsed. Reality healed itself in a cascade of light that was visible across half the galaxy.
The hollow did not stop entirely. Vessels that had already crossed over remained, scattered and cut off from reinforcement. But the tide had turned. The endless reinforcements were gone. What remained could be hunted down, destroyed, eliminated one by one. The war was over.
The treaty was signed 3 months later.
I was present as a witness, standing beside Admiral Morrison in the great hall of the Dominion's new council chambers. The old council had been disbanded, its members forced to answer for decisions that had nearly doomed the galaxy.
The new council included representatives from every species that had survived the Hollow, including, for the first time, humanity. Admiral Morrison signed the document that formally welcomed his species into the galactic community. He did not smile. He did not celebrate.
He simply nodded, as if checking an item off a very long list.
Afterward, I found him on a balcony overlooking the capital city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold.
"How does it feel?" I asked. "To finally be free, to finally have what was taken from you." Morrison was silent for a moment, watching the sunset.
"It doesn't feel the way I expected," he said. "We spent so long preparing for this moment. Generations of my people lived and died waiting for the day when the veil would fall. And now it has, and—" He turned to face me. In the fading light, he looked older than I had ever seen him. Tired, but also somehow at peace.
I always thought freedom would feel like victory, like triumph, but it doesn't. It feels like responsibility. He gestured at the city below, at the Dominion people going about their lives, rebuilding their world after the devastation of war. These people are counting on us now. The whole galaxy is, and humanity has to be worthy of that trust.
I understood then what had frightened my ancestors so much about humanity. It was not their capacity for violence, though they possessed that in abundance. It was not their unpredictability, though they remained impossible to fully understand. It was their potential. The potential to become something greater than themselves. The potential to transform suffering into strength, imprisonment into preparation, injustice into determination. The potential to face 8 centuries of darkness and emerge not as conquerors seeking revenge, but as protectors choosing to serve.
"Admiral," I said, "I owe you an apology. Not just for the veil, for everything. For underestimating you, for fearing you, for assuming that power and cruelty were the same thing." Morrison looked at me for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled.
"Third voice, do you know what humans call that?"
"What?"
"Growth. He reached out and gripped my shoulder, a gesture I had seen humans use with each other, a sign of connection and respect. That's all any of us can do. Learn from our mistakes. Try to be better. And when we fail, because we will fail, get back up and try again. I thought of the stories I had heard about humanity, the wars, the suffering, the countless times they had nearly destroyed themselves. And yet they were still here, still trying, still learning. Perhaps, I said, the galaxy is fortunate that you were contained for so long. It gave us time to be ready for you. Morrison laughed, a genuine sound, warm and surprising. Third voice, I don't think the galaxy will ever be ready for us. But that's okay. He turned back to watch the sunset, his eyes fixed on the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. We'll be patient. We've had a lot of practice. I returned to Sol 1 year later. The system was transformed. Where before there had been a prison, now there was a gateway. Ships from 100 worlds passed through the space where the veil projectors had once enforced isolation. Earth itself had become a pilgrimage site. Species from across the galaxy traveled there to see the world that had given birth to humanity, to walk the same ground where a primitive species had first looked up at the stars and dreamed of touching them. I walked through a human city, watching as aliens of all types mingled with the people who had once been deemed too dangerous to be allowed among the stars. Children ran through the streets, human children playing alongside the young of a dozen species. And above it all, the sun shone down with the same warm light it had provided for billions of years. I thought of what the Dominion had tried to do. We had blocked humanity from the stars, afraid of the fire we saw burning in their souls. But fire cannot be contained forever. In the end, humanity had shown us something we never expected. The fire that burned within them was not just destruction. It was warmth. It was light. It was the spark that kept hope alive through 8 centuries of darkness. We had tried to extinguish that fire. Instead, it had saved us all. There is a monument now, at the edge of Sol System. It stands where the last veil projector once hung, a simple structure of stone and metal bearing a single inscription. To those who waited, to those who prepared, to those who never stopped believing that the stars were theirs. I visited sometimes when my duties bring me to human space. I stand before it, and I remember the fear that drove my ancestors to imprison an entire species. I remember the patience that allowed that species to endure. And I remember the fire that in the end burned away the darkness. Not just for humanity, for all of us. The stars are vast and ancient, filled with wonders beyond counting. But of all the species that have looked upon them, only one was ever forged in fire. Only one emerged from the crucible of imprisonment, not with hatred in their hearts, but with light in their hands. Only one, when the universe tried to extinguish them, burned brighter instead. We blocked their sun. They showed us their fire, and the galaxy will never be the same.